This story contains strong language and depictions some may find upsetting. Day 12. Emerge. Cora blinked her eyes open, but everything was dark. As they adjusted, she could make out a faint pink hue and a crack across the visor of her helmet. She felt panic rising and her breath quickened, but she could breathe. The air was wet and musty, earthy like a forest floor, but she could breathe it. Her heads-up display was dead, and the usual hum of the oxygen pressurizer was silent, but somehow she was breathing. Moving was a different story. She could turn her head inside her suit, wiggle her fingers and toes, but she was held tight by something. She was in a standing position, but could tell her body weight was being supported from all around. She deliberately slowed her breathing to counter the feeling of claustrophobia. She had trained for situations where the larger mechs they used for moving cargo could seize, potentially locking the pilot in the full-body control cockpit in place. He didn't want someone panicking when driving one of those things. She had learned to take slower breaths, imagine her body shrinking, away from whatever was trapping her in place, burying her alive. She was able to see more detail now. The pink hue was a veiny, damp material that surrounded her, pressed up tight to her visor, with only the faintest hint of light beyond. That was enough for Cora. She bunched her fists, tilting her wrists and pressing the hardened knuckle pad of her gloves away from her, testing her tomb. It gave a little. Her shoulders and chest fired as she tried to add her arms to the movement, pushing symmetrically outwards. She was warming up, and her laboured breathing condensed on the glass in front of her. Suddenly, there was a tremor or a shiver. Whatever she was trapped in moved and seemed to loosen its grip on her. She didn't want to believe too soon that it was her doing, but she immediately put it to the test. The slight increase in space allowed her arms to push further, driving her knees outwards and at the same time back and forth, building a rhythm. Another shudder, another loosening. She was moving rapidly now, in any direction she could think of. She lost her patterns and started pulling and pushing and elbowing wherever she could. In spite of her situation, she was reminded of a younger Cora throwing a tantrum on the floor of a supermarket, many millions of miles away. A chink of light, off to the right. There was a split opening, top to bottom. She started rocking her body in that direction. If she could get a finger through at least, she might be able to pull herself free. But before she had the chance, with one last quiver, the cocoon wobbled open all around her, splitting open in several places, and Cora emerged, tumbled out, and slipped over the walls that had peeled away. She laughed with relief as she looked up at a purple sky with blends of yellow and lime, and remembered what had happened. She had been passing this uninhabited planet, and received a vague proximity warning from Central. Pilots must remain out of orbit for reasons, blah blah blah, the usual automated message about places that hadn't been properly surveyed. But by the time she got it, she had already committed to using the gravity to slingshot out back towards Kappa Quad, an elegant manoeuvre, though she thought so herself, that would save her a day at least. She closed her eyes to focus the memory. Something had hit her port thruster. The stick had gone limp and she was pulled in towards the planet's horizon. Then nothing. She rolled onto her side to see where she had woken up. Under the vast sky stood a rocky expanse dotted with trees, every 30 or so meters in every direction. Except they weren't trees, of course. A couple of meters tall on average, these were more like giant houseplants, a waxy clay-red trunk with a frilly grey and green flowering head on the top, gazing upwards. Cora studied the prison she had just escaped from, and saw, to her horror, the wall she had broken through with the very same waxy carapace that made up the stem of the other plants. Hers was now ruptured and collapsed, splayed out like a banana skin. She checked her suit. Battery, dead. Life support, offline. The crack in the helmet was one of many breaches all over, with tears on the inside leg, the back of one arm, one of her boots very loose. Thank God for a breathable atmosphere. But she couldn't be sure of that, not indefinitely, so she had to find her ship. The locator unit in her suit was no longer an option, so she would have to do it the old-fashioned way. It was nowhere in sight, but judging by the position of the stars, the hook system that had been ahead of her as she made her way to Kappa, she roughly imagined a course that she could have come down on and strode out in that direction. She tried to ignore a sharp scratching in one of her heels, aches and pains that had remained unnoticed until now. She had to keep it together, push through to the ship, and she could patch herself up there. As she moved through the silent world, she noticed that some of the plants in the distance were much wider than the others. Could there be someone inside them? She wondered. They were off to her left, though, a sizable detour from her chosen path, and she still had no idea how far she had to go. She put it out of her mind. Her back was really aching and her arms were tingling. She had to get to her medibay. There was a wet pop in the distance behind her. She span around just in time to see something rocketing upwards, a wisp of water vapour trailing it as it climbed, curving upwards and disappearing into the stars. Somewhere below, one of the alien flowers was bending back up from being forced down to the ground. That's what had hit her ship. These fucking things had shot her out of the sky. She broke into a run. As she moved, she punched the auxiliary battery pack on her right thigh, praying for it to do something. The ghost of her heads-up display appeared for a second before dashing Cora's hopes and going blank. She punched her leg harder and harder, but nothing. She only got more shooting pains up her arm and down her back for her trouble. She tripped, falling hard onto her knees and swearing. With frustration, she slammed her right foot down in front of her, using all her strength to stand back up again. She felt so heavy. A bolt of electricity shot from her waist down her right leg and into her heel. The pain made her cry out and the shock made her pull her leg up. But her foot didn't move. It was locked into the ground. As she twisted to lean down, she found her left foot was also stuck. She was glued to the floor, standing in an awkward half-split where her feet had landed. Her eyes were wide as she struggled, heart racing. Her upper body strained and swayed, a mime artist with magnetic boots. Her ankles exploded with pain, and blood soaked through the white suit, followed by tendrils. The bright pink worms, an awful wrong pink, curled out through her suit legs and found their way into the ground. Cora vomited. Her whole body was screaming, itching, breaking. There were splitting and creaking sounds that couldn't possibly be coming from her, but they were. Her fingernails lifted as more vines emerged from underneath them, ripping open her hands as they reached downwards. The gloves fell away as she twitched and spasmed, tears rolling down her white face. Her last breath was a moan, as a greening flower head pushed its way out between her vertebrae, through a rip in her suit, heading up towards the stars.